good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm going to turn my volume so I can hear you better. There we go. How is your afternoon been?
It's been a good afternoon. I got to go to the gym, which is always a good thing. And I get to spend time with you and everybody else who's joining us today.
Yay!
So that's cool. And then I've got some stuff after this. So it's kind of a full Sunday, but that's
Sounds like
good.
a great day to me.
That's better than having nothing to do, I guess.
Yes, especially during pandemic times. Historical note for anyone watching much later. We are in the middle of the COVID pandemic. So, well, it's such an honor to have you here. I'm so excited about this topic. I've really been looking forward to talking to you about this, and just talking to you in general, but about a really important topic as well. So I'll let you introduce yourself in just a second, but we're talking today around mastering the urgency that we all feel all the time or during this urgency epidemic, and how we can really thrive and use that in a positive way. So I can't wait to get your thoughts on that from the workplace therapist himself. So I know a lot of, I see several people who have joined that do know both of us, but for anyone maybe watching later who isn't familiar with you and your work, can you tell us just a little bit more about what you do?
Yeah, so I really wear four hats in the world. So I normally say three, but it's really four. So one hat is I'm an executive coach. So I work with individual leaders around all these kinds of challenges, men and women equally alike across all different industries. Second hat I wear is I do a lot of team facilitation, helping teams function better together, healthier together. The third hat I wear is more of my teaching hat. So I've historically taught at both Emory's Business School and Georgia State's Business School and all the areas of leadership communication. And then my fourth hat is more my media hat. That's where my handle, the workplace therapist, kind of comes into play. I've got a blog, I've got a podcast where I put out content to make our workplaces a little bit healthier, a little less bumpy. So no matter what hat I wear, my entire purpose and passion in life is one thing, and that's to help us live a life and workplace more free of dysfunction. Everywhere forever. So it keeps me really, really busy. And I do have a clinical therapy background as well as an MBA. So it's kind of my version of a Reese's peanut butter cup. Somehow it kind of works.
I love all of your analogies. Oh, that's fantastic, and definitely a mission I can get on board with. There is no end to job security in this field of curing workplace
It's
dysfunction.
kind of funny because just when I think, I think I've seen it all, then we have a pandemic, and then everyone has to figure out how to work together differently
Yes.
for an unknown period of time. At first everyone thought, oh, it'll just be a couple months. Now they're like, no, I don't no idea how long this is going to last. And a lot of companies and other organizations are changing their policies. So this is going to become the new normal, some hybrid. So it's going to be very different and weird for all of us.
Indeed. It'll be very interesting to see how it plays out, especially for those of us in the field. We've talked some about how, well, even far beyond our field, we have, people transitioning to virtual. And I never thought I'd be doing this with you, but, here we are because um, it just times called for creative solutions. So we still get to chat about some really interesting stuff. So I can't wait. Um, Gosh, so I guess just to level set first around this topic. So I've heard you say in different situations that we're in an urgency epidemic, which may take on entirely new meaning now that we're in a pandemic as well. But
Totally.
haven't really thought about that. But just before we dive deeper into how we can really use it more positively, can you just walk us through level setting? What does that mean when you say we're in an urgency epidemic?
Yeah, so let's take the last kind of 3 to 4 months aside, because this has been a little weird, although it still plays out in the last 3 or 4 months. But prior to that, when we go back to normal times, my experience was regardless, it didn't matter who I was working with, what situations or challenges she or he was dealing with, didn't matter what job they had, two things were true. First, time was everyone's most precious resource, not money, it was time. And second, everything was urgent all the time. Didn't matter if you worked in the admissions office in a university or if you ran a marketing department for a company, didn't matter. Everything was urgent all the time. And urgency by itself is not necessarily a bad thing. It's the thing that kind of motivates us to get that term paper done, right? Or get
Mm-hmm.
that project in on time. But when everything is urgent all the time, it's another form of anxiety. So in
Mm,
controlled doses, it's really, really helpful. But urgency as in itself is anxiety. And so we have
mm,
to make sure that we kind of manage it properly. So, that part of, I'm so fortunate that we're talking about this today because my new book came out, The Hot Sauce Principle, and the analogy of it really fits this perfectly. There it is. Because urgency, is like hot sauce. You can have like little small doses of it like this,
oh,
and it's
that's so
great.
cute.
It's like motivates us and keeps us focused and adds a little spice and flavor to life. But if we have this much, then it's like, oh my gosh, my mouth's on fire. I don't know where to focus. I'm overwhelmed. And so it's knowing both how to manage this as a leader, make sure we're doing this one and not this one. But also when we have leaders do this to us, how do we manage that better and push back? So that really is kind of the spirit of this idea of urgency. It by itself is not a bad thing, but in the wrong doses, it can be disastrous.
Mm, preach it. Mm. That is just, I love that tiny little hot sauce bottle you have. That's so cute.
I know
Um,
Tabasco loves me. I buy all these in bulk, And so in normal times when we're seeing people in person and I talk about this and teach classes on it, I give everyone a bottle and say, stick this on your
oh,
desk. This is a reminder of what urgency is. You should keep it there to remind you. I'm only want to do some of this, and I'm adding some spice to life, not completely burning people's tongues.
I love that as just even a key takeaway, even though we're at the beginning, just to have a little reminder wherever you go, if, whether right now when you're working from home or wherever you go, just to have a little reminder. So we'll keep that in mind for the end when we're talking about key takeaways.
Okay.
Um, so I love how you use the term controlled doses. I thought that that was a really good way to talk about how we can really begin to think about using this in a more positive way. And it was something that I really did enjoy about your book as I was reading it, just the sense of hope that there is. Because I think a lot of us, myself included, when we think about urgency and it being an epidemic, it does feel very negative and it feels incredibly overwhelming, like we are out of control. And so I love just the positive spirit and some of the things that you said around how we can use urgency positively. So that really is kind of the main thing I wanted to help our audience with today is, instead of kind of pushing back against it and trying to avoid it and feeling overwhelmed about it, what are some ways that we can use it more positively in our lives?
Yeah, so let's take it on first in a situation where we're in control of it. We're the person putting urgency or can put urgency on other people. So we're kind of the leader in that situation. So a couple things around urgency. So let's I'll back up a little bit. So famous guy who has been at Harvard for decades, a guy now by the name of John Kotter. And John Kotter's a change guru. He's kind of this master of change management. So whenever there's books written on how do you kind of create organizational change or lead people through change, he's either quoted in the book heavily or he's often the author. And he's got this really simple 8-step framework or process for change. And it's not by any accident that the first step on that process is urgency. You have to create enough urgency. So urgency is necessary when we're trying to get other people to change. Because what urgency does, just like hot sauce, is it creates, when done the right way, it creates a healthy state of discomfort. And after all, that's what we as people need to change. We don't change through comfort. That's not how we work. And the irony of this is, if I could give you and everybody else kind of watching this $1 million right now, I wish I could, but if I could,
Sounds good.
everyone's, you're a really super good person, Ashley, and I know you give part of that money away to causes and charities and things that you feel passionate about. But all of us as human beings would take another portion of that $1 million, and if we were gut level honest with ourselves, we'd use it to make our life more comfortable.
Mm.
We would buy that house we always wanted, or that car we always wanted, or go on that trip we always wanted to go on, or save for retirement. But it's all designed to make us more comfortable. And so the irony is we push towards comfort, but we grow through discomfort. So
Yes.
urgency is that thing that gets us to go do something different so we can grow. That's why it's so important, and that's why it's the first on John Kotter's kind of step for how do you drive change. So I think it's an important understanding that while we understand and know that discomfort is a good thing, that's where we grow. If you're pushing discomfort on somebody, the first thing they're going to ask themselves is, do I trust this person enough to let them make me feel this way. Because, if you just walk up to somebody you don't know and start, saying, hey, you need to lose weight, so they're going to say, I don't know you. You can't tell me that, right? So we have to have that trust built. So I think that's an important kind of first step in this, is how do you build that trust with those folks that you're trying to create urgency in, so when you do create that discomfort, they're willing to follow you.
Oh, so many things that I want to dive into with that. But I'm gonna go where I think the biggest punch is for the time that we have together, which is trust.
Yeah.
That is something I give whole talks on. I feel so strongly about that topic, and exactly what you said. I didn't write down your exact words, but the fact that it is, people ask, do I trust this person before I'm going to let them push urgency on me, which on the other end, becomes burnout, right? And so
Yeah.
do I trust the person giving this message? And could not agree more. Most important foundation, precursor to many things, urgency and influencing being one of them. So I've had the pleasure of sitting in on many of your talks where you discuss a formula you have for building trust. And I know several
about that.
I know hopefully the people watching are smiling, because I see several people that know both of us and have probably heard this as well. But for anyone maybe watching after who's not, or I know there's at least one person watching who's not familiar with your trust, your famous Brandon Smith trust formula. Can you walk us through that? How do we build trust?
Yeah. So super simple formula, I think. And so kind of give you a little history and background in this. So this is probably 10 or 15 years ago, and I was teaching at Emory, and I was trying to figure out, how do I take this idea of trust and turn it into a mathematical equation? So it's another way we can kind of get a hold of it. And this is what I ultimately ended up settling on. So you got to kind of visualize this for a minute. So trust is authenticity plus vulnerability in parentheses. Okay. So inside parentheses, authenticity plus vulnerability. Okay. And then the sum of that, you multiply that times credibility. So authenticity plus vulnerability in parentheses, multiplied times credibility, gets us trust. Now, when I first did the formula, I did it as a straight up addition formula. I did authenticity plus vulnerability plus credibility, and it crashed and burned. Because in that way, when it was an addition formula straight up, credibility could be 0 and you still had positive trust. And that's not how trust works. So the reason why that multiplier is so important in the middle of the formula is, if either side of that formula, the authenticity, vulnerability, or the credibility goes to 0, no trust. So it's a way for us to think about, how do we show up with people and really bring credibility, bring authenticity and vulnerability. And so, if you'd like, we can talk about a few examples that kind of play into those, but that's really what we're trying to do with trust. And so I think one of the simple points around this is, obviously, it takes some time. You can't walk in on day one with somebody that you don't know and say, okay, we're going to build trust real quick in the next 3 hours, and then I'm going to put urgency on you. It just doesn't work that way. So
we all know that leader that's tried that. Oh gosh, yeah, bringing me back to elementary school math with the, if either side goes to 0 because it's multiplied, or if credibility goes to 0, you don't have trust. And so just such good stuff. Yes to all. I would love to dig into everything around this. It's so important, and I think it's something that has the potential to transform organizations and have them do so much better by their people, by their customers, by their profit. And so I could go on all day about that. But so you said, going back to the leader who hasn't had all of your instruction and read your book and is trying to apply the trust formula in 3 hours. So there are probably some leaders out there watching, either now or in the recording, who are thinking, I wonder, maybe I haven't taken enough time to build that trust foundation, and I really want to motivate my people with urgency. If they want to do that now, are they just out of luck, or what advice would you give them to build trust in the short term when they don't have a lot of time?
So I think there's a few little things they can do very quickly in all 3 of those categories. So let's start with credibility first. So one of the ways you can quickly build credibility, there's two that I particularly love because they're very simple, really important, and you can ruin credibility if you don't do them. So the first one ties into a piece of research that was done a few years ago by a group of researchers studying bosses. And they asked this question: what's the worst kind of boss to work for? Mm-hmm. Worst kind of boss. And I thought with my clinical therapy background, they were going to be like, the pound the fist on the table kind of boss was going to be the worst boss. That was not the worst boss. Micromanager wasn't the worst boss. Ghosting boss wasn't the worst boss. What they found was the worst boss was the highly inconsistent boss, or the unmedicated bipolar boss. The one where you're gripping the steering wheel, getting ready to go into work that day, and you're parked in the parking lot. You're about to walk in, and you have no idea what you're going to get. You could get a raise, you could get fired. Either are equally possible. So one of the simplest takeaways for us as leaders is be consistent. And that even goes down to your calendars. Have consistent one-on-ones, consistent times to meet with people. Consistency is one of the ways we build credibility. They need to know what they're going to get from you. Okay, so consistency is really important. The second one, that's probably the easiest, quick one, when you're trying to build credibility with somebody, is be super responsive. Responsiveness is a great way to build or lose credibility. Because in absence of communication, people always assume the worst. So if I send you an email and I don't hear from you in 3 days, I don't immediately think, oh my gosh, she's getting to get to it. She's really busy. I think of all these other horrible things. Right. So responsiveness is a great way to build credibility, particularly with your people and your team. Now, I want to be clear. Responsiveness doesn't mean you got to respond with the perfect answer. Responsiveness just means you respond and say, hey, I got it. I'll get back to you on Monday. It's just letting people know I'm listening to you. And your needs matter to me. Is kind of what that communicates. So those are two quick ways on the credibility side that you can start to move that number up in the trust formula. Now let's go to the other side, which is more the softer skill side. So authenticity, another proxy word for authenticity is transparency. It's kind of like in the clinical world, we'd call that congruence. And that is what you see is what you get. That's really what we're talking about. And congruence is what I'm feeling and experiencing and thinking on the inside is what you experience for me on the outside. And so transparency, congruence, whatever you want to use for that, that's really what we're talking about with authenticity. So how can we be more transparent in our motives, in our thinking, and how we're feeling, and being able to share that with our team? So making sure we're doing that. So as a leader, you can ask yourself, am I doing that well? Am I sharing my motives and intentions with my team? Yep. That's really important. Again, absence of communication, people assume the worst. Yes. In clinical terms, one of the more challenging leadership styles is, in clinical terms, we call it flat affect. So back in my clinical days, when I'd work inpatient, we'd have to chart on patients. One of the things that we put down is, did they have a flat affect or not? And flat affect means like poker face. Like you can't read them. I'm having a great day. I'm having a horrible day. It's exactly the same, And so we've got to make sure that, we're communicating, we're expressing, and even if we're not very visibly very dynamic, we're using words that communicate what we're feeling. So that's authenticity. That's pretty simple. Now the hardest one I say for last, and that's what our good friend Brene Brown would lift up, is vulnerability. It is so powerful and hard for all of us to do. Now, I want to be clear. Vulnerability does not mean vulnerable emotions. It doesn't have to. It doesn't mean you've got to cry or tell a really deep story. You can, but it doesn't have to require that. It can be things like saying, I don't know. I was wrong. You were right. I need your help. Those are all forms of vulnerability. So finding ways to use that language is how we build trust with our team, even with our significant others. That's how we do that. Now, it can also be sharing a story. So maybe part of the way you want to connect with your team, and you don't have a lot of time, is you want to share maybe a more personal story of something that happened to you in life that was a state of discomfort or urgency. but you
Mm-hmm.
grew so much through that. And so you want to share that story so they not only get to know you and understand you, but also kind of supports where you're trying to take them. So
Mm-hmm.
those are a couple little nuggets across those three that leaders can do right away that can help kind of set them up for being able to, use a little bit of this guy when necessary.
Yes. Ah, so good. Thanks for all of those tips. I was listening, and they're all things that I mean, you could start today if you wanted to. That's what I love about it, is it's not, trust does take a long time to build and it's easy to break. But so it can feel like you look at the base of the mountain and it's all this work that you have to do. But I think it's really helpful to know that there are things we can just, little things that we can start today if we need to make progress on that. And I love the term you use, kind of move that number up. I think about trust a lot like a bank, where you have to have money in the bank before you can withdraw, and for people to give you some of their trust to make them have a sense of urgency. And so you really want to be building that up in times when you don't need it. So I loved that analogy with a number. That it's a spectrum, it's a scale, it's a consistent work. Good
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah, and I think that's spot on. I love that idea of a bank because it's so true. Because we need to be able to make sure there's enough in there so when we have to make withdrawals or take
Hmm.
out loans, there's some kind of collateral in there to leverage. Absolutely.
I'm remembering now, I think I may have actually gotten that from you a few years back at the business school when you talked about the ratio for feedback, the ideal ratio for feedback, um, being, not one, not two, but five, to
Yeah,
where,
5
yeah, if you
for
have,
everyone negative, 5 positive for everyone negative.
yes, yes. So when you have, I think you said three is about that sort of break even point where you're withdrawing the same amount of money in the bank, if we want to use that analogy that you had in there. And so you at least break even. But if you want to maintain sort of that surplus, you want to go above that three, ideally closer to five pieces. And to me, it's the same thing. It's the same principle. We want to have that trust built in the bank, so that when we need to withdraw some and make someone feel a little sense of urgency and push them out of their comfort zone, they trust us and they know that there's trust in that bank, if you will.
Yeah, totally,
Uh,
totally. And remember, and for that 5 to 1, just for those that maybe haven't heard that ratio before, that's studying high performing teams. But I even just read another recent article that restated the work that John Gottman and the Gottman Institute does around personal relationships. And so they study marriages, partnerships, and just generally personal relationships with a significant other. And what they found was the couples that were together the longest and had the healthiest dynamic had 5 positive interactions with each other versus every 1 negative. So it doesn't have to necessarily mean words of affirmation as much as it can be 5 positive interactions. So that might make it a little bit easier for us as leaders. Maybe even think of it as, while it's hard to maybe have 5 pieces of feedback for every 1 negative, how about 5 pieces of positive interactions? Where you smiled or congratulated somebody or you did something that made them feel appreciated and valued and safe, because that's the other part of this too. Psychological safety is part of what we're trying to drive. Right? If I feel
mhm.
safe, then I'm going to feel much more comfortable letting you kind of push me out of my comfort zone. If I don't feel safe, no.
Right.
I'm going to put all my armor up and I'm not going anywhere. So that's what we're trying to get to, that place of psychological safety where people feel really safe with us. So we can say, all right, here comes some of this. It's going to be okay.
I just the growth through discomfort is just, I love it, because there's really that right amount, just like, speaking of hot sauce, um, to give us that positive uh, mastery of our story and our work and our experience without going too far into the, working, everything is urgent all the time and it's an epidemic and I'm working myself to when I burn out. So um, I'm just gonna throw a plug out there briefly because I see we have a number of people watching. If you happen to have any questions on this topic, feel free to drop them in the chat and we'll try to get to at least one or two. I have many questions. I could talk to Brandon for a very long time, so I can hold my questions and replace them with yours, because we really want this to be helpful. While they're thinking, you mentioned vulnerability, and this is something that I know you and I both work with people who this is one of the hardest things that they deal with when they're trying to build trust. And it was funny when I was reading your book and you said there was something, I don't remember the exact quote, but something about, you mean I have to tell people I don't know what I'm doing? Yes. Yes. Sometimes you have to look human. And so I was wondering, speaking of hot sauce, if you could talk a little bit about the right balance between not, making it, I think you called it a therapy session in your book, like bawling and telling everybody your life story and all of your emotions versus having that poker face and not showing that you're human ever. Where's that sweet spot?
Yeah, it's a really great question. So you can be too vulnerable. I want to be clear. I want everyone to take on vulnerability as a challenge because that's where we build intimacy, personally and professionally. It comes through vulnerability. So it's really, really important. I can't emphasize that enough. You're never going to have intimate relationships if you can't be vulnerable. Period. Fact. Mic drop. Done. It is not possible. So if you're hoping to have intimate relationships, personally or professionally, you can't do it without vulnerability. That said, it can go too far. I had a client, this was actually a story told to me by a client, and this particular individual was brand new to a department, and they had been promoted to a senior role. And the first thing he did on his first day was he called a meeting with everybody and then basically said, I have no idea what I'm doing. I just started bawling into tears. And for what's told me later, they said, that was not the right thing to do. That was not what we needed in that moment. So where I'd like to borrow from is a famous theologian. He since passed away. The guy's name was Jim Fowler. He used to teach at Emory's Theology School. And he would say, you want to give people hope and handles. And I think that's such a powerful statement, hope and handles. And there's probably not a better time for hope and handles than right now. And so what that looks like is you would come out of the gate. Another kind of supporting point around this is if you've ever read the book Good to Great, there's a chapter in there called, I think it's called Level 5 Leadership. And they talk about, I think it was Admiral Jim Stockdale, his style was really powerful. He came right out and with the harsh reality. Here's the situation. And so that's where you be vulnerable. You say, there's a lot of things we don't know. I don't know. I'm not exactly sure where this is going to go. I don't have all the answers. But then you go to hope and handles quickly. You say, but I know together we can get through this. And I know we're going to get back to a place of normal. Mm. So let's talk about what we need to do this week to get closer to that. So you start with vulnerability, but you quickly move into hope and a plan. Mm. And I think that's an important part to this. So vulnerability builds that connection, but people also want to feel like, you still know what we need to do, right? Like I can count on you to do that. I'll give you one more example of a recent kind of example of too much vulnerability. I had a client of mine, and in the spirit of vulnerability and not wanting to say that she had all the answers, when her directors would ask her questions, she'd say, you know what, let me go check with the SVP. I don't want to give an answer to that because I don't really know what he wants. Let me go check with him. Mm-hmm. By the third time she did that, they started asking her, can we just set up meetings directly with the SVP? Because clearly you don't know and it's just delaying things. And so what she needed to do was say, here's what I think we should do in the interim. I'm going to run it by our SVP, but for now, this is the path I want you to follow. So it's this balance of still leading, but leading and honoring vulnerability. Hopefully that kind of balance makes sense.
That was brilliant.
The water is really unclear. I'm happy to try and do better.
Oh no, I mean that I think you've mentioned that story previously. I've been in many of your talks, and so it's sounding familiar, and I had forgotten what a great visual that is with hope and handles. I think that really tells you the balance. It is very difficult to get right. It's uncomfortable as a leader to show vulnerability. It's, you never know whether I used to call it calculated vulnerability. You never know when, you want to share your story, but is it going to land? Is it going to be too much of a sob story? And I know you've done a really good job of that. For anyone watching who hasn't seen Brandon's TED Talk, you should definitely go watch that. We'll drop a link in the description afterwards, but he does a really good job of telling a very personal story about his family. And I'll just leave that as a teaser so that you have to go look and see what it is. But that was an example where I feel like it was done really well, where people just connected with you and felt like, okay, you're a human. How about that?
I'm a real person. I had someone tell me that one time when I shared my story in class. They said, "You're a real person." I was like, "Yeah, you know what? I am. I'm a real person."
Oh, wow. How about that? Oh, it's too funny. Okay. Wow. Okay. So time is going by really fast. So again, if anyone has questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat, or if you're watching later, still drop them in the comments. We'll be happy to answer those for you. But I guess in our last few minutes here, I wanted to just address a question that I know you and I both get a lot. I would say it's one of my top three, which is around influencing without authority. Mm. And again, it's easy to put urgency on people, even they may not receive it as well, but you can do it when you have authority over them more easily perhaps than people who don't have authority or who want to influence maybe their peers or their manager or whoever they don't have direct authority over. So we talked about one step in the process, which is building trust, which can be done in any direction, peers, your manager, your direct reports. Another one you talk about is having a compelling why. And so I feel like, talking about building some of these precursors and these foundations is really important, because it's something all of us can be doing today, so that when we need to pull on that urgency, it's there and ready for us. The foundation is there. So yeah, someone that couple of those watching know I've been reading a lot of Simon Sinek's books over the quarantine period, and so you gave a nice hat tip to him, and he wrote a book called Start With Why, which talks about the importance of how everyone knows what they do. You talked about a lot of the things that you do in the beginning when you were introducing yourself, podcaster, coach, but not a lot of people know why they do it. And so can you talk just a little bit more about why having that why and that compelling vision is really important for urgency?
Yeah, I think, well, partly it's to make sure that you're clarifying your intention. So in absence of communication, people assume the worst. I've said that a couple times already today. And so it's understanding why I'm pushing us down this path. And so it does tie into hope and handles to a certain degree, but it's getting people to understand your motives so they're trusting you. That's important, because without that, they'll fill in the void, and they're going to fill it in with something more self-oriented. You're just doing this because you just want to get a promotion, or you want to make more money, or you want to be seen as the best, or whatever it is. So that why, the personal why, or even the reason for the urgency, is kind of helps people understand kind of the intention. And the best why is something that everyone can be a part of. Mm. So it wouldn't be, so one why might be, gosh, we need to do this because this way, our department's going to be, more efficient and effective, and it's going to, be able to thrive better. Okay, that's a good why. A better why would be, we really need to do this because not only is this going to help us and help us preserve our roles and, be able to provide for our families, it's going to help many of our coworkers and colleagues keep their jobs. And it's going to really improve our communities that we live in. That's a more compelling why. So if we can tie it to the people that we work with and the communities that we live, and that's why we're trying to do this, all of a sudden that has a different meaning. Like I was doing work with an organization, and they're in the manufacturing space. And in their particular manufacturing facilities, it's not uncommon they have multiple generations working in the same place. So granddad started there, then dad works there, now sons or daughters work there. So you got families working in there. And so when we're really trying to motivate that group, it's about their families and their community. We need to make these changes, folks, because, you know, this is more than a job. This is our legacy. This is our family's legacy. And we want to preserve that for many, many generations to come. So we need to make these necessary changes so we can be, you know, as productive and as impactful in the next 50 years as we have been in the last 50. So that's pretty compelling. Like, who doesn't want to be part of that? So just, you know, that why is so important, because it helps people say, yeah, I'm willing to go through pain for that.
Yes, that. I think you said somewhere about urgency is about lighting a fire under people, and if that doesn't do it, I don't know what would. And something that occurred to me as you were saying that is also this importance of listening, because if you don't know what's important to the person you're trying to influence, it's going to be hard to come up with that why, especially in the terms that they would really relate to. So I happen to be a big believer with everything that's going on in our world and all of the divide and unrest that we have, that the key out of all of it is listening. So I'm a big fan of that.
Yeah, listening, so so we know what really matters to people. And
Yes.
to your point earlier, I had a leader I worked with. She was a general manager at a luxury retail store years ago, and I was working with this particular chain of retail stores. And she said to me, sometimes I know I need to light a fire in my people, which is inspiration, and other times I need to light a fire under them, which is urgency. So, and so that why can do both. But truly, inspiration lies with the why. So it gives us a little bit of a double dip, because we're saying, okay, we're going to inspire you with the why, but then we're also going to create some deadlines and some discomfort that we're going to have to do in order to really, make that vision come true. It's kind of like when people want to lose weight or they want to change their health. They do it for themselves sometimes, and that's motivating. But when they're doing it for their family or for people they really care about, the motivation factor is like a level of 2 or 3. So, how do we kind of get there? That's powerful.
Yes, it is. Oh, I love it. For anyone watching, we're barely scratching the surface. We're talking really about building the foundation. There's so much more in Brandon's book around all of the things that go into urgency and how you can apply it positively to your life. So you'll have to read it to really absorb all of it. In the meantime, I did want to take one question that we have. Thank you, from Juliana. Her question is that I hear a lot when people say, I don't have time. So how can you find time to connect in these challenging times in which we're living?
So connecting is much harder right now when we're all virtual. So if assuming that there's 2 elements that are at play. You could be in an environment where there's even more pressure and urgency. We think about people on the front lines, right? Not only is there pressure and urgency, you've got all these protocols, social distancing, masks, which prevent some of the social connection. Mm-hmm. And then you've also got the other factor of some folks that are maybe not on the front lines that are all working virtually. Either way, we have more obstacles to connect than we used to. Or in simple terms, I can't just say, let's go grab coffee. Hey, let's just have lunch. Let's catch up. That's not happening right now. So pardon my geekiness in this way I think about it, but you have to operationalize the relational stuff.
Yeah.
So normally the relational stuff can just happen organically. It's not happening organically now. It's not gonna. So you have to operationalize it. What I mean by that is, making an agenda, have questions you're going to ask on a Zoom call, or, put time on your calendar to connect. It has to be a priority. It has to go on your calendar, because it won't happen organically. So I understand that people say they don't have time, but my challenge to them would be, make the time. Pick a day of the week and a time that day and say, I'm going to find time here to connect with my people, because they need it. Everyone's got some kind of worry, fear, anxiety going on. It could be their personal health. It could be their family's health. Mm-hmm. It could be worry for their job. It could be worry for their neighbor's job. there could be so many things going on right now. So, and it could even be other things like worrying about the school you're starting and how am I going to teach my kids virtually while I still have to do work. I mean, there's so many things. And so being able to make the time is really important so we can hear those things and we can connect and understand where people are. Because that's another way they feel safe and helps to promote trust, which then allows us to take people down those paths of discomfort that we know they might need to go down.
Yes.
Great question.
Yes, and yeah, and to our earlier point, too, it doesn't have to be 2 hours long. It can be small doses. I think one of the things that I'm missing the most during these COVID times with relationship building is those what I would call water cooler conversations, where you're sitting around waiting for the meeting to start, or you're talking in the break room while you're microwaving your lunch, or whatever, wherever you are, whatever the thing is you're doing. We've taken those out because the Zoom meetings, the nonstop Zoom meetings have a start and an end, and there's no opportunity to connect, kind of in between. So I would say, even just putting 5 minutes in the agenda to just not talk about business would make a huge impact. So it's these little things that we can do every day. I love all of the tips that you gave earlier around things that people can do now to be building that trust and that foundation, so that when they're ready to motivate someone through urgency, they're ready to do that. And it's little things that really add up to that, as well as, it's good to have time to really sit down and have a Zoom dinner with somebody or whatever you need to do that's safe during COVID times. But I love that. So as we wrap up here, any other, I can review some of the ones I wrote down. Being consistent, sharing your motives, being willing to say you don't know, being really responsive. Any other tips that you have to wrap us up around how people can use urgency positively in their lives and not feel so overwhelmed by it?
So I'll end with two final tips that we haven't talked about yet. So I'm going to talk about the situation or scenario where our boss is putting too much urgency on us. Like every project is urgent. That happens a lot. And so if everything's urgent, nothing's urgent, right? And we can't focus, we can't get things done. So one of the best ways to address that is go back to her or him and have a healthy trade-off and prioritization conversation. So I'm happy to do this for you here, but if I do this for you here, I won't be able to do this over here and meet the deadline. Are you okay with that? I had a business school student several years ago, and she went to go work in investment banking. And during the summer, she came back and she said, all the managing directors, there was multiple in the office, would come up to her and give her urgent projects. And one day she turned to one of them and said, I'm happy to do this for you, but if I do this for you, I have to go tell the other managing director that I can't do his project. Are you okay if I go tell him that you told me that yours was more important than his? And they said, oh, never mind. So having those healthy conversations of forcing trade-offs and prioritization, we could also call that client management, because your boss is your number one client. So don't be afraid to have those. So that would be that tip. My last tip would be, this comes from a client of mine several years ago, and it's kind of the story is in the book a little bit. And he was notorious for making everything urgent. So after I shared with him the idea of hot sauce, he went out and he bought 3 bottles of hot sauce and stuck them all on his desk. 1, 2, 3. And every time a project was urgent, he would give a bottle of hot sauce to the owner of that project, and they had to keep the bottle of hot sauce until the project was done. And why that was so powerful was he only had 3 he could give out.
Yes.
Once he gave out all those 3 bottles, he couldn't make anything else urgent. So it was kind of a forcing mechanism for him. And so that's another really simple tip for you. If you find yourself always trying to create everything kind of urgent all the time, create limits, and you could do it with some bottles of hot sauce.
I love it. I love it. And I love that we talked about kind of whether you're on the receiving end of urgency, how to handle that, or whether you're giving the urgency to motivate others or influence them at all levels. I think we kind of hit every sort of aspect of it in just a short, time today. So good. And I did want to just mention, towards the end of the book, you have an entire section on your personal life. So if you feel urgency with, the kids' schedules or, your place of worship and just all of the other kind of social commitments that you may have, Brandon does have a whole section in that. We prioritize the work since my business is all about work. We have the workplace therapist and flourishing work represented in this Instagram live, so we focused on the workplace. But I did want to just give a hat tip to the fact that you closed with some really helpful tips, including just a really helpful some coaching questions and an illustration that people can do. So I definitely wanted to mention that. Brandon, it is always a pleasure to see you and chat with you. I hope that people have found this as helpful as I did. This time has absolutely flown by. So if they want to know more about you and the work that you do, what's the best way for them to get in contact with you?
So the best way is just Google the workplace therapist. I'm the only one. You'll find me pretty easily. And it gives you a lot of information about kind of my blog and podcast and all the other good stuff. And and that gives you a good sense of kind of what I'm up to. And then the Worksmiths is my other site, and it's just like Blacksmiths, but the Worksmiths. And then that provides more my service offering. So when I work with organizations or individuals, that's where folks hire me. But you don't have to hire me to get the value of the things I bring to the world. And then, of course, my book, which is The Hot Sauce Principle, is available on Amazon. So you can just type in The Hot Sauce Principle, and it's pretty easy to find. So those are all initial places people can go.
Only one workplace therapist and only one hot sauce principle.
That's right.
Makes it really easy to Google. But we will, to help everybody out, and put a link, a couple links. I mentioned your TED Talk as well. So if people, we really just scratched the surface, y'all. So if there's more you want to know, definitely check out those links. And we'll just have to do this again. We'll just have to do a part 2.
I would love to.
So good to see you. Thank you so much for being here, Brandon.
Ashley, thanks for having me. Super fun.
Take care. Right. Bye-bye.
Bye.